Millions of people saw the apple fall, but only Newton asked why. This legendary quote is not only an important reminder of the importance of the theories we obtain by asking why and how questions in science, but also a very important observation that points to Nice's extraordinary genius. When we look back after something is discovered, the discovery may seem obvious. We have seen this in the recent past with reusable rockets. For example, what an obvious development, but it is not so obvious until someone comes up with the idea and makes it real. In fact, if you don't question or if you act as if you already know the answer to everything, there is no need to explain. That is, questioning a falling apple, that is, realizing the law of nature is already an event in itself, but let's say that this is what is happening around you enough to realize it. But why it falls and how it falls is a completely different thing. And this is where what we call science begins. Science does not mean observing or collecting data. It is about being able to explain the data and observations, and those who can unravel the deepest secrets of the universe are the ones who are the most eager to explain them, and the ones who are willing to spend years in this direction. That's why today we will try to get inside the brain of this strange genius, and we will look at both his head leftovers and his dark side, his occult inner world, and the important events that developed his character. I hope it will be very interesting for you to see that such an iconic figure of science had some very strange obsessions that you would never expect. Why he was born on Christmas night, December 25th, 1642. In a previous video, I told you how the Gregorian calendar was developed in 1582 instead of the Julian calendar to resolve the incompatibility between calendars and astronomical events. Yes, he had not yet switched to the new calendar like the rest of Europe. Forget the new calendar that is still used today. In fact, he was born on January 4th, 1643, not December 25th. This ambiguity also casts doubt on Newton's claim that he was born in the same year that Galileo died, because Galileo had died on January 8, 1642, according to the new calendar, 360 days before he was born in the previous year. He had a troubled childhood. He was born prematurely, and he was named after his father, Isaac Newton, a rich farmer who died 3 months before his birth. The name Isaac comes from the name of the biblical prophet Isaac, or Isaac in Hebrew, who, according to the story, God, or according to Jewish belief, El Orange, foretold what was going to happen to Abraham, who was very old, and Sarah, who had never had a child until that day. Sarah laughed at the good news, so God, or Elohim, decreed that the child's name should be Isaac, a word meaning laughing or laughing. However, he was not to be seen all his life, for when he was 3 years old, his mother Hani Ice Coffee married a wealthy clergyman, Bar Nova Simit, and left him with his grandmother Zeki, a desertion that hurt him deeply and made him hate his family, especially his stepfather. Fortunately, the headmaster, Henry Stokes, resisted his mother because of Newton's interest in science and allowed him to return to school. This product would appear for the rest of his life, and he said he would not rest until he had crushed whoever was reading him fruit, and that's how he got to 1661 when he was 18. When he finished school, his grades were quite good, and he was accepted to Trinity College, part of the University of Cambridge. At this point, however, no one was yet aware of the potential of the swallow, and the famous Tutun had not yet achieved anything extraordinary. However, with the guidance of his professors, he did not limit himself to the teachings of Aristotle as his colleagues at the university did, and he also studied contemporary physicists, mathematicians, and philosophers such as Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler. At the time, astronomy was still in its infancy, and the study of the motion of the celestial bodies was dominated by astrology, which is now a complete pseudoscience. The doctor who tested him was astonished at his lack of knowledge of Luton geometry, which sharpened his tone, and he realized that he had done the country an injustice by rereading the elements. Years later, in a letter written by one of his bitter enemies, Robert Hooke, he quoted a saying of Conditional Bernard, describing scientists like himself as dwarfs perched on the shoulders of the giants who had preceded them. This phrase was later popularized as, "If you can see farther, it is on the shoulders of those who came before me." This is faith. That is, the accumulation of science was beginning to realize the importance of its nature, and in the process it continued to develop itself rapidly. But at the same time, did you swallow it? A few of your friends, a playmate of yours, had written about this incident, so he had really thought about the fall of the apple, why the apple was falling towards the center of the earth. It doesn't rest or shoot upwards, you hear. And that's because if there was no gravitational force in nature, it would be at the center of objects. not on or near them, so it would be related to the mass of the object. Also, this force was not infinite, it decreased as you moved away from the object. He had thought of all this at the time, but it would take him 20 years to turn it into a fully developed theory. He also thought that this gravitational force was not only related to the Earth and the apple. All the objects in the sky must exhibit this force, and this could explain the motion of astronomical objects. But there was a small problem. The mathematics that had been developed so far was not enough to explain those meets. So he left a ton of work to open a Chigkoftiki, no Sigoftechi. He did what a giant of science would do and invented calculus. You know that mathematics, which is taught in a class at the university and on which our whole civilization is based, he developed it from scratch so that you can explain your problem mathematically after doing all this. He turned 26 years old, and his work between 1664 and 1667 will be known as An Mirabilis, that is, miracle years. This term would be used once again 240 years later, when Albert Einstein, who published 4 papers in 1 year that changed our view of space-time, mass, and energy, finally showed that the theory he had developed was incomplete and succeeded in developing a better one. These telescopes, which are still in use today, were 10 times smaller than the telescopes of Ulu's time, but still more powerful than them. So Newton would begin to be able to better follow the objects in the sky and reveal their laws of motion thanks to his work in his very small field. All these achievements resulted in his appointment in 1669 to the Lucagen Professorial Chair at the University of Cambridge, a position he held for 33 years, becoming the second head of this chair, to be succeeded 310 years later by Stephen Hawking. In 1671, he published a paper in which he claimed that white light is a mixture of other colors and that colors are formed by the refraction of white light, which we know to be absolutely true today, at a time when it was believed that colors were a mixture of light and darkness. This contradictory work was actually welcomed by many in the first place, but he could not properly explain his experiment with prisms for his paper and the experiments he could do, and when other physicists repeated his method, they did not achieve the same result. So the backlash against the Niton color theory grew, and eventually Robert Hulk, to whom I will come back in a moment, harshly criticized Niton and his methods. And it was this criticism that led to the plunge into darkness of the Utah, who could not stand this criticism and believed that he was always right. And it was also the main reason why Newton withdrew from publishing his ideas on gravitation for many years, because these criticisms of the scientific community, which were academic even if erroneous, were good. Remember that there is no translation of gravity yet, it is just an idea here. That is why the prayer of shame darkness has manifested itself here, as all the researchers of this word, darkness, have done. I use it not in the sense of evil, but in the sense of being known or indexed, because although until the 21st century the mass of the people knew him only as a scientist, he was much, much more than that, as you will see in a moment. I think for him, understanding these laws would not only understand God, but also bring balance to the social life on Earth. Obviously, this part is not a single and dark side for the Maitan period, but there was much more to Newton than this. He was interested in a pseudoscience called numerology, which I explained in the Golden Ratio video. And in particular, as I just said, he was trying to predict when the apocalypse would come based on numbers and narratives in the Bible. He considered many possibilities for the year of the apocalypse, but the year 2060 particularly caught his attention. According to him, on this date, Jesus would return to rule in a global kingdom of peace. The corrupt three-food high school would collapse, and the true word of God would begin to be spoken freely. Also, according to Newton, the Jews would return to Israel during this period, rebuild their temple, and because of their efforts to invade Israel, the apocalyptic war would begin. He did not believe superficially. He made very detailed explanations. I did a lot of reading. For example, after Newton died, he left behind 2,100-odd books, and 27% of them were theology, that is, theology books, while mathematics and astronomy were only about 8.3%, and physics was about 3%. Of course, do not forget that there were much fewer science books at that time, but we clearly know that many of them had a very deep attachment to theology and increased this attachment to a level that we can call small today. For example, he has a much more extreme belief system than geniuses like this empty village, which he knows to be very religious. For this reason, alchemical studies were banned in England in the 16th century for fear that if everyone produced gold, the king's power would be taken away. Was obsessed with the philosopher's stone, now popularized by the Harry Potter series legend, has it that this stone, or the energy represented by it, was used in the creation of the universe and still keeps the universe running smoothly. It also has at its heart the ability to transform all elements into each other. This is why this philosopher's stone appears as the holy grail of alchemy. Those who possess this stone will be able to rule time and live long lives. While pursuing the tale of the philosopher's stone and the dream of transforming the elements into each other through alchemy, he conducted many unsuccessful experiments with toxic elements such as mercury, lead, and lead, during which time he is thought to have unwittingly suffered from mercury or lead poisoning, so much so that at one point he began to experience very serious mental problems. He was even on the verge of death, forget that he was realizing that he was losing control. He had wasted years trying to discover the secrets of alchemy and technology, and had not made the slightest progress, and at this point, his biggest worry was that despite his genius, which he was sure existed, he would be forgotten in the dusty pages of history. And if in 1684 the astronomer Edmund Halley hadn't visited him in the air from the comet. Yes, that's right. Today, Isaac Newton's name is known to you as the Sea. That's the book, but that wasn't NISA's only quarrel. Did you know Robert Law, who criticized him on optics and triggered the collapse? When he was at the height of his field, but he started writing some letters, and the correspondence between the two continued for many years, and his claim to the law was that he had discovered gravitational tearing himself a few years earlier, and therefore the brass rope, or you can't imagine how this would have enraged a curmudgeonly character like Lipton, who used a microscope to observe cells and discover laws that are fundamental to engineering, such as the law of elasticity, which gave rise to what we now call the biological cell. You were making the mistake of your legal life. Who gave works in many fields from geology to paleontology to the point in map science which defines the law, which he already bristled at, made up his mind to erase it from the stage of no law. But here at the beginning, when the law came against him, folks Knighton was weak and the law was strong now. You have to forget he was building a reputation as a peeling star, and he never stopped using that reputation. One portrait of him that has the potential to survive to this day was hanging in that society of girls. Newton had that portrait of the law destroyed. They either smashed it or put it somewhere and we can't find it. It's not exactly known, but we don't know exactly what Robert Hooke looks like today just because of this ambition. He was such a grumpy guy. But he was known for this kind of fierce fights. He was known as he was known. He was known as he was known. In fact, his popularity among the people had increased so much that he even decided to enter politics. He fought and won his biggest and most famous political battle against King James II, who wanted to make Cambridge University a religious institution again. But why he fought for you is not because he was irreligious or anything like that. Let's not be misunderstood. It was just that the king's religious views did not coincide with his own views. In 1693, when he was about 50 years old, his mind could no longer bear these pressures, and he had a very serious psychological attack during which he declared that his few friends were conspiring against him and that they were all demons and that they must die. Among Newton's friends who had their share of this hatred were the leading philosophers of his time, such as John Locke, and even his philosophical views on the governance of the locum state in a way that would soon be associated with the political identity of his homeland. Although I thought that natural philosophy could direct politics, my belief that it could be a basis for it was shaken after seeing the political career of the egg. But this is a separate discussion that I will not go into here. At this time, English coins were easily counterfeited, and the country was in financial ruin. According to some estimates, 1 out of every flower coins on the market was counterfeit, and this is where his interest in alchemy would come in handy, as the government first put him in charge of the mint in 1696. Then you put him directly in charge of the monetary administration, fixing the qualities of money such as weight, and minimizing the inaccuracies in money production, which greatly improved the situation. You also went after counterfeiters and ruthlessly punished them and even made them the main ones in the squares. Somewhere you swallowed him and his skills. He had found a legitimate way to vent his hatred against his challengers, but his success allowed him to continue as master of the moment, the director of the mint, until the product of his political visibility, combined with his academic achievements, led him to become a member of the Royal Society. In 1703, he was made head of the society. From that point on, Newton became obsessed with power and fame, Taking too many risks and being incredibly wealthy, he used this power to crush anyone who dared to stand against him in the history of the law. As if he had been wiped off the stage, he used his friends who were Halil to steal the star catalog and publish it without his permission, or something like that. Newton was on his way to becoming president of the Royal Society when a committee, probably at Nice's request, met to examine the work of Lines in MIT and concluded in 1712 that population was the father of calculus. Even T, whose defense was not heard, hated each other on both sides for such reasons. And in 1715 we have the point that he proposed to solve a new problem to see which of the two approaches was superior, while you believe that your opponent is pretty much retarded and that he did not care much for this challenge, which was not very well expressed in the problem given to him. Therefore, the live permission method was superior, but it did not attract much attention. A year later, when he saw life, the fight ended by itself. Today, it is accepted that these two invented calculus independently of each other. And finally, as I mentioned a little bit, he lived a life of wealth and power throughout his life, but it will be a lesson even for today's investors who swallowed from 1720. In order to get rid of its debts, England made a deal with France and established a shipping monopoly in the South Sea in Central and South America. The shares of this company were offered instead of money to the people who owed money to the state, because the company's revenues would be very high because there was a wheel in the middle, and this was presented to the creditors as a good deal. He is said to have said that I, who can even calculate the movement of objects in the sky, cannot foresee human madness. According to the stories of his cousin, he never allowed anyone to use the words South Sea around him again, yet when he died, he left a fortune of $1.5 million in today's money. Despite all this grumpy and strange life, he died on March 20th, 1720 at the age of 84 as a great Daha who made contributions that you please do not know. He never solved the secrets of theology and alchemy.